Well, this is the third Sunday into the season of Lent. And, I know that you folks are all deep into your fasting and self-denial. And I gotta say, you're all looking pretty good. All things considered. Okay, maybe you're not so much into the fasting and the self-denial and everything else, but because I really do believe that Lent doesn't necessarily have to be a time when we just sit around and flog ourselves and give up and suffer. There should still be joy in this season. And I had an idea. This is an idea for some fun that we can have maybe next week or the week after. I was thinking about all of those passages in the Bible that we don't necessarily talk about very often, but are still there and are still really kind of troubling sometimes, or at least hard to understand. And I was thinking that in the next week, if you contact me, email me, talk to me after church, send an email, write a note about a scripture reading that you just don't get, let me know, and I'll do kind of a lightning round. and we'll go through like a bunch of them. And I don't make any promises that'll make it make sense, but I'll give it a shot. So if there's a reading that you have a hard time with, a biblical or religious concept you don't quite get, talk to me, and we'll see what we can do. Today's reading was actually quite a good example. This is not the most controversial reading that Dave has shared with us in the past. But I think one of the reasons for that is that we know the end of the story already. We know that we're in Lent, but we know that Easter's coming, and so it doesn't seem quite as jarring. But this reading, imagine that you were there. Imagine that you were one of the ones that was talking to Jesus. Because for a long time before then, there was talk of the Anointed One, the Messiah, the one that was going to come and fix everything. They've been talking about that for centuries. And talk of that in the recent time around Jesus, it was louder than ever because things were not good. The corruption at the temple was at an all-time high. There was rampant unjust lending practices, which meant that so many people were losing their farm, their land, and all of that land was going to unscrupulous lenders. So the divide between rich and poor was growing more, and of course, they're living under Roman military occupation. They were so ready to have somebody come and make this all better. And here he was. So many people believed that Jesus was the one. He was going to come. He was going to bring glory back to the kingdom of Israel. Justice and peace was going to reign. This is the one that the prophets had been talking about. And so any time now, maybe a little bit longer, Jesus is finally going to get ticked off, pick up that flaming angelic sword and go wrath of God on everybody that is taking advantage of the poor, the Roman military, get rid of the temple corruption. Everything is going to be better once Jesus finally gets to it. Just a little bit longer. He's going to start any time now. But then they talk to Jesus, and apparently that's not the plan. Apparently the plan is that very soon he's going to get arrested and murdered. Can you imagine what that would have been like for those first followers to hear that all of their hopes and dreams that they had placed in this person is all for naught? Now, if I were to start my sermon with you and say, oh yeah, in the next couple of days, I'm going to get murdered. First of all, you wouldn't believe me. And if you did believe me, you'd be upset, I hope. But I'm just your friend and minister. I'm not the one that's supposed to usher in this whole new age. This is a terrible, terrible news for these people. Could they understand what Jesus was saying? Yeah, he did talk about that 3 days later thing, but that's so far out of the realm of possibility, that's even harder to understand than the whole arrest and murder thing. This is a terrible time to be one of Jesus' followers. And what about for us? You know, Jesus then goes on. He doesn't try and walk this back at all. He actually ups the ante. He draws a fairly terrible line in the sand to see who is actually willing to be one of his followers. He goes on to say, oh yeah, no, not only am I going to get crucified, but if you want to be one of my followers, you too are going to have to pick up your own cross to come with me. Now, again, the context is so different from us now and then. For us, we see these lovely brass crosses. We have one here. They're actually very pretty. But for first century Palestinians, these crosses were always up on the hillside. They were put there by the Roman military as a reminder to anybody who might want to raise some trouble. This was a reminder. Cause trouble for the Rome, and you are going to be tortured to death. And they left them there. These crosses, horrible, ugly symbols of death. So when Jesus says, take up your own cross, this is not a comforting thought. Now, fortunately for us, Jesus often includes two different meanings in what he says. There's often the literal and the metaphoric. And I don't want to try and soften the blow, soften the controversy of his words, because this really is a very harsh thing to be saying. As a lot of his followers really did die, persecuted for following Jesus' words. When Mark was writing these words to his audience many years after Jesus has died, they are still experiencing persecution. And so when they hear this, they're thinking, yeah, I guess I really am picking up my own cross, because I too am standing up to this unjust empire. But there's also a metaphoric element to this. Fortunately, I don't think any of us are going to be persecuted for our faith. That really doesn't happen in North America, no matter what you hear from people complaining on the news about having to be forced to make a birthday cake for a gay birthday party. That's not persecution. That's just people calling you out because you're being a bad person. For us, maybe what this reading could be for us is that there are some aspects of our life that we're going to have to set aside, that we're going to have to leave on that cross to make room for new life. And it's the stuff that Jesus talked about, that we have to give up our own sense of what is wisdom to make room for God's wisdom. We have to give up our notion of who our neighbor is in favor of what the gospel tells us about our neighbor. In short, it means giving up our own egocentrism, our own feeling that I am number one, to leave room for relationship with each other. When a baby is born, the entire world exists for that baby. You ever play peekaboo with a baby? It is so exciting. And there's a reason for that, because once the baby can't see you, in the baby's mind, you don't exist. So when you cover up your face, you're not just hiding behind a blanket, you're gone. And when you show your face again, Grandpa's back. And this, because a baby's world exists only in what they can see. Their parents exist for the sole purpose of taking care of their every need. It is absolute, complete egocentrism, and that is exactly the way it has to be. Because when you're that small and that fragile, the whole world does need to be about that baby. Now, but then we grow, don't we? We get a little bit older, and we start to recognize that, oh, actually, other people do exist for their own purposes. We start to understand that we should care for others and their needs, that they count, that they don't exist only for my pleasure. Most people grow out of this. The ones that don't, we would often call psychopaths, narcissisms, president. I know what you were thinking. But one thing I have to caution you here on, though, is that this is something to be balanced. For far too long, the traditional Christian church has really pushed hard on the idea not only of understanding that we need to let go of egocentrism, but it's also delved pretty far into self-loathing. The church has often taught us that we are horrible, broken, sinful beings that can only be redeemed through the church. That's in my mind, that's horse hooey. Psalm 8 tells us that God created us to be little less than angels. Jesus said in the second half of that greatest commandment that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. We are glorious, wonderful beings. We sometimes don't reach our full potential, but the potential is there. So maybe to follow Jesus doesn't mean to think less of ourselves, but to think of ourselves less. As we grow and we mature and we start to learn that other people are also important, we do start to see, okay, my family around me, they are really, really good people, and I care about them. But to follow Jesus, that's not enough, because that's still based on egocentrism, because it's my family that counts more than other people's family. Maybe we start to think about, well, it's people in my religion that I can care about, or my country. But again, that's egocentrism, because it's my origins, my traditions, my skin color, my language. And Jesus is calling us to more. And every generation thinks that their generation is the most important in history. But even that, too, is egocentrism. This is an egocentrism that is being played out all the time, thinking that our comforts right now are so much more important than the needs of future generations. And so that's why we are fine with leaving an environmental debt to our descendants that is going to have to be paid. It is a debt that is going to be enforced and collected by the laws of physics itself. Maybe if we need to take up our crosses, maybe it's not necessarily in self-denial, but understanding that we are neighbors. That this Lenten path, the Christian path, is not a race to be won. I'm going to get to the realms of God first. It is instead a path that we walk together, hand in hand. That the first ones to that gate are going to be the ones that hold the door for everybody else that's coming along. Making sure that the last is first. That we go in together. That this is not a solo journey. This is a team sport. We're all in this together. Every one of us, every rock, tree, bird, stone, drop of water, all God's creations, bound together in one family by God's grace.